Steve, who I'll introduce, although he needs not much introduction, will be joined midstream by Kristin Richmond, who is the CEO of Revolution Foods, which is a company that just coincidentally has the same name as his company, but he invested in them long after they were named. But we're going to start talking to Steve, and then Kristin's going to join us somewhere midstream. But Steve Case, many years the leader of AOL, kind of the company that really pioneered the online revolution. And I have still friends who have AOL email addresses. It's not uncommon at all. It's a sign of one's maturity, perhaps.
Or wisdom,
but
perhaps.
Steve has wisdom, yes, of course. But Steve has also really done some amazing work in the interim since then with Revolution, which I'm going to ask him to define in detail in a second, but particularly as an investor and a facilitator of entrepreneurship with a very national focus, trying to avoid the pitfalls that Silicon Valley and the venture capital industry has otherwise fallen into. So Steve, why don't we start by you just telling us exactly what Revolution is?
First of all, it's great to be with you, and congratulations on the continued success of Techonomy. I remember attending one of your first conferences. Must have been close to 10 years ago, something like that.
It was great. 9 years ago.
There you go. So, but it's been great to see the progress. And you mentioned AOL. It's worth remembering that when we started AOL 35 years ago this summer, only 3% of people were online, and those 3% were online an average of 1 hour a week. So now in this pandemic, we're living kind of always online in Zoom land. It's amazing to see what's happened over the last 35 years. It's been quite a journey. Obviously, I'm grateful for the role our team played in helping to kind of build those on-ramps and get America online, get the world online. As you know, when we, over 20 years ago, we merged AOL and Time Warner, which didn't work quite the way I was hoping it would be. And some of the moves now Disney is making around Disney Plus and others, really even this week, organizing the company in an integrated way was what I was hoping we would do 20 years ago, but we didn't. I then left, stepped down as CEO when we announced the merger, left as chairman a couple of years later, and then started Revolution. So it was quite a while ago. And I really wanted to back the next generation of entrepreneurs. I was less interested in starting another company myself. I was more interested in partnering with, mentoring, and investing in a new generation of entrepreneurs, and we've evolved over the years. The centerpiece of our efforts is Revolution Growth, later stage companies like Revolution Foods that you mentioned, also DraftKings and Big Commerce that recently went public, Clear, which is doing airport security, now a health pass tied in with COVID, Tempest doing some really interesting things around oncology. So a number of great iconic companies in the making at the Revolution Growth stage. We also have Revolution Ventures, invest more at that Series A stage. And we also launched more recently, about 3 years ago, the Rise of the Rest Seed Fund. We have 2 funds there. We invested in 150 companies in over 70 cities. And we're delighted to be doing that in partnership with some of the most iconic entrepreneurs and investors, people like Jeff Bezos, Howard Schultz, Eric Schmidt, Meg Whitman, Tory Burch, Sarah Blakely, investors like venture capital investors like John Doerr, Jim Breyer, private equity folks like Henry Kravis, David Rubenstein, hedge fund people like Ray Dalio, a couple dozen others. Some of the, the really most respected folks in the country are joining us on this as co-investors, as partners in backing these entrepreneurs in other places. And we believe the next generation of companies will not just be housed in places like Silicon Valley, which is great and will continue to be great, but be spread around the country, and that will drive more economic growth around the country, more job creation around the company. So for us, it's both an investment strategy, kind of arbitrage. Valuations are lower in these rising cities than they are in San Francisco or New York, but also an attempt to level the playing field so there's more opportunity for more people in more places.
Well, talk about the intersection of that philosophy with the pandemic era. First, one aspect of that, of course, would be, will the Zoomification of America allow more dispersion of entrepreneurship? But also, I know you are passionate in your belief that it's only through the job creation we need to get out of this hole we're in is going to come from new companies. So talk about all that.
Yeah, the interesting data, and I stumbled into this about 10 years ago when I was asked to co-chair something called the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, which led to a series of recommendations, including something that the White House embraced called Startup America, and I was asked to chair that. and then worked with President Obama on the Jobs Council and Jobs Act and a bunch of other things. And so I was kind of minding my own business as an entrepreneur for a while, and then as an investor for a while. I was not as focused on the policy around innovation. But when I dug into this, I was shocked, frankly, to find out that essentially all the job creation comes from new companies under 5 years old, startups, not from small business. Small business in aggregate accounts for tons of jobs. It's very important parts of our community, but doesn't create new jobs. If a restaurant goes out of business, probably will get replaced by another restaurant, probably employ about the same number of people. So small business as a sector does not create net new jobs. And surprisingly, big business, Fortune 500 as a sector, does not create net new jobs. Some companies are growing fast, adding jobs like an Amazon. Others, like General Electric, are declining. If you add it all up, it doesn't create jobs. So the job creation engine of this country is startups, point one. Point two, most startups, not all startups, but most startups do need venture capital as sort of the jet fuel to power their growth. Venture capital right now, as we sit here, over 75% of venture capital dollars go to just 3 states. California, New York, Massachusetts, 75%. There's the other 47 states fight over 25%. These are big states: Virginia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, all less than 1% of venture capital last year. California alone, Texas. 50%. Texas, about 2%. So everything a little bit bigger in Texas. Florida, the 3rd largest state, is 1.7%. So there's this big disparity in terms of where the capital goes, and therefore a big disparity in terms of where startups start and scale, and therefore a brain drain in many parts of the country where people leave where they are, leave where they're graduating from university to go to the coast, usually to Silicon Valley, because that's where the opportunity is, in part because that's where the money is. And it's created this great dynamic for Silicon Valley, but it's kind of hollowed out other parts of our innovation economy. So that's why this is so important to focus on. And 2 other data points, just to put them on the table, which is even more sobering. If you look at the venture capital data last year, more than 90% of venture capital went to men, less than 10% to women, even though women are half our country. And last year, even though Black Americans account for about 14% of our population, Black founders got less than 1% of venture capital. So if you look at the data, it does matter where you live. It does matter what you look like. It does matter who you know, what school you went to. If you have an idea, whether you have a shot at building a company, really a shot at the American dream. We're trying to change that and try to level the playing field so there is really more opportunity for more people.
Yeah, it's great to hear you talking about that. Okay, well, the pandemic, I want to just keep the pandemic woven in here, but I know, well, before we bring in Kristin, I know you have some very strong opinions about what we need to do with stimulus based on your philosophy that you've articulated quite elegantly just now. Of course, that assumes we're going to have some more stimulus, which I guess we can assume, but you could give your opinion as somebody who lives in Washington about that. What should we do from here to get out of this hole?
It didn't completely answer your first question. In terms of the pandemic, I actually do think the early evidence is it may be a tipping point, may be kind of a shake the snow globe moment where people who went to the coast now are deciding to shelter some other place. And some of those people, both venture capitalists and entrepreneurs, are likely going to decide to stay in those places. Most of them working for their current employer. They won't work remotely for Facebook or perhaps for a venture capital firm. But over time, some of those people will migrate into those local communities and either start a company there or back companies there. So I think this could be, obviously there are a lot of terrible aspects of this pandemic. Tens of millions of people lost their job, 210,000 people have lost their lives. But perhaps one of the silver linings is this rise of the rest may accelerate, and the brain drain we've experienced for so many decades might become a boomerang, which will lift up these cities, will help them rise, faster. So that's my optimistic view of a very difficult pandemic situation. In terms of the relief efforts, as Larry Summers earlier said, I applaud the fact that people moved quickly to try to put something in place, but it was really focused too much on existing businesses and existing industries, not enough, in my opinion, on new businesses and trying to create some of the industries of the future. And so trying to lean the policy in that direction makes sense. Senator Klobuchar introduced some legislation a few months ago to try to get more venture capital into regional firms, which would help the growth of those regional ecosystems. Some of the proposals we put on the table were to some of the remaining PPP money, Main Street lending money, might be focused on regional opportunities or focused on more inclusivity, women, people of color, things like that. So hopefully, once we get through this election, which obviously is pretty pretty noisy. There'll be more of a focus on, well, what should the right policy be so we can continue to be the most innovative entrepreneurial nation in the world. We can do it in a more inclusive place, so it's not just a few people in a few places winning, in a very big way, and a lot of people in a lot of places feeling kind of left behind. Hopefully that will be the focus in the coming years.
Okay, here's a quick question from one of our members I'd like you to just quickly address, and then we're going to bring in Kristin. From John Goldberg, do you see the pandemic encouraging other VCs to follow your lead and being less provincial in the sense that they're only investing in a small number of places and get more out? Are you finding this? I mean, you've got listed that long list of people who are backing the Rise the Rest thing. Is this a trend you're seeing broadly?
Yes, I would say, first of all, the number of venture capitalists, it started looking at this as an opportunity before the pandemic. It just has accelerated where more people are taking it more seriously. They are generally in other places. Certainly some people are still in San Francisco, but a lot of people have got to other places. And they are starting to recognize that in a world where you're getting Zoom pitches, doesn't really matter whether they're next door or 1,000 miles away, and are starting to make investments based on Zoom presentations and not actually physically meeting folks, which opens their eyes to opportunities in other places. So that's why I think it will accelerate in terms of even the coastal investors looking at these regional opportunities. I think you'll see more regional funds growing. You'll see more angel networks developing regionally. And I do think over the next decade, people will be surprised how many breakout, iconic, multi-billion-dollar unicorn kinds of companies are in cities all around the country, not just a few cities on the coast.
I really do love the way you talk about this. Let's bring Kristin in. Can we promote her to video here? Kristin, are you there? Oh, good. I see your audio's going on.
I'm here. Hi.
Hi. Welcome.
Hi, Steve. Hi, David.
Welcome. So, Kristin, I'm so glad you're here for several reasons. I want you in a second to tell us in some detail what Revolution Foods does. But one of the things that makes your presence so pertinent with Steve, obviously he's on your board and all that, but one of the things, Steve, that has differentiated you as an investor that Kristin herself was explaining to me when we talked on the phone is that, or Zoom or whatever it was that you understand the need to intersect with regulation. And it's because of your own experience as an entrepreneur, but it's also because you're based in Washington. You have a pragmatic bipartisanship attitude about so many things, so much more than most people in your industry. But maybe you, Steve, could kick us off by talking a little bit about that idea that entrepreneurs need to understand regulation, and weave that into a little introduction of Kristin here, will you?
Sure. Well, first of all, I mentioned at the very beginning, co-founding AOL 35 years ago. It's also worth remembering that 35 years ago, it was still illegal against the law for consumers or businesses to be on the internet. At the time, it was built by DARPA, it was restricted to government agencies and educational institutions. So in the early days, when we were getting started, yes, we had to build the servers and the on-ramps and get the modems built into PCs and create the software and partner with a lot of media companies. We also had to get the laws changed so like people could get on the internet. And it took several years, but finally the internet was commercialized and with the Telecom Act. And so that was for my first experience of the importance of policy. And most people think of policy as regulations that slow down innovation, and sometimes that is the case. I've also seen many examples of policy and regulations accelerating opportunities, creating new opportunities, and lived it firsthand. And then in the 90s, when the internet really became of age, spent a lot of time on policy-related issues, e-commerce, should it be taxed, things like that. So I lived this in my early years, and as we now move into this third wave of the internet and dealing with healthcare and food and other sectors, regulations do matter more. And it's not just about the software you write, it's about the partnerships you form and navigating the policy side, which brings us to Revolution Foods, a fascinating story where two women decided more than a decade ago that it's crazy that at our schools in this country, they're basically eating junk food. It's bad for them, leads to obesity, all kinds of other problems in our society. It's also bad for the learning outcomes. Set out to build a company that would change that, and it's scaled quite rapidly. And so we've been watching them for the better part of that decade and invested in the company about 5 years ago. And it's a great example of really bringing entrepreneurial zeal, passion to a problem society has, and recognizing that, again, it requires partnerships, it requires policy. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Yeah,
Thank
Kristin,
you.
so elaborate further on what exactly you do, and also talk about how essential it is that you intersect with government figures at all levels.
Yeah, thank you, David, and thanks, Steve. It's absolutely essential. So Revolution Foods, as Steve said, I started it with my co-founder over a decade ago to dramatically transform the quality of meals and the quality of nutrition that we serve our students nationwide. There's a $20 billion market in school food, and a lot of people don't realize it's breakfast, lunch, snack, supper, oftentimes weekend meals. This is a reliable source of nutrition for millions of students around the country, and therefore millions of families. And so we saw a huge opportunity. As a businesswoman, I saw an opportunity to tackle an antiquated $20 billion market. As a mom and as a citizen, I saw an opportunity to drive health and academic outcomes for students and be a partner to, and this is where I'll get into your second question, be a partner to mayors, be a partner to superintendents, be a partner to teachers, be a partner to PTAs and parents who are struggling with these issues every single day. We design, produce, and distribute between 2 to 4 million healthy meals per week. That was pre-COVID. At this point, we have now pivoted, as you know, David, into serving adults through public-private partnerships as well. And about 50% of our business since COVID has been serving families who are food insecure primarily, but not exclusively, around the country. And that kind of work necessitates that you are working hand in hand with city leaders, with school leaders, with public health leaders, with USDA leaders, across the board. Those strong public-private partnerships are absolutely critical to achieve the outcomes we're looking to achieve.
Yeah, and one of the things that really struck me, which I guess I'd never thought about, you almost all you're doing is prepared food, right? Which is much of it's very fresh. But historically, before you came along, virtually all students in American schools ate frozen, pretty much junk food in many cases, but even when it wasn't junk food, it wasn't really fresh prepared food in the sense that yours is. And you were saying, among other things, you may have the largest capacity to make and distribute prepared food in the country. And you're doing it at scale. You've done 450 million meals in your company's history. But you're a B Corp, which is another really fascinating and impressive thing about you. Talk about the way you think of your responsibility as a company. And this came up in the discussion with Larry Summers before. It's come up yesterday in our discussions. It comes up all the time. The role of business and the responsibilities of business are shifting. Your attitude is emblematic, I think, of a new psychology in entrepreneurship. But explain how you think about that.
Right. Well, I think there is, and I know Steve agrees with this, very little tension in the long term around building a valuable company with the right mission and core values. And effectively for us, that means that everything we do as a company is focused on designing for the stakeholders we serve, those families we serve, those schools we serve. When we can do that better than anyone else in the market, we are both providing a quality product, we're driving health outcomes, but we're also becoming more differentiated than any of our competition, therefore driving value for our shareholders and for our team. And so for me, they go hand in hand. The question, folks will ask is, how long does that take to do? It's not overnight. But ultimately, as cities, in my case, as mayors, as superintendents, as chancellors and PTAs are looking for higher quality for their students because they know the impact of great nutrition on health outcomes, they're going to choose a company and a partner that shares those values and designs to those standards. And that is an authentic brand that they can trust, therefore driving value of the company. So, I like to think of us as a living, breathing example of my favorite expression is we drive our value through our values. And I truly believe that as a CEO.
One of the things that Steve was talking about before was job creation and the role of new companies in doing that. You are a fantastic example of it. So talk about how you have done that.
So I'm so proud to say, David, and Steve's been such a big part of supporting this through not just capital, but also wisdom and guidance and support. We are not only a B Corp, but we 3 times in a row have been named one of the fastest growing inner city job creators in the United States of America. We have 2,000 employees. We are 86% people of color and 66% women in the company. So, and that's because for us, our model is serving families primarily in the inner city communities we work in. And so for us, we're hiring from the communities we serve, which means that we're going to have better product because we're going to have people committed to the students and families they're serving. We're going to have better product because we're designing to those needs from community members who understand those needs, and we're going to be responsive to the communities we serve. And I think I was sharing with you one of my best examples is when I was pitching Boston Public Schools recently, and I said, well, 37 people on our team are BPS parents. So they know more than ever how important it is to deliver a quality product to Boston.
And Dave, Kristin won't mention this, but I want to sing her praise a little bit. Just this week, Inc. magazine came out with a list of the most impressive female entrepreneurs that really are inspiring a whole generation. And Chris was on that list, and we're super proud of that. And it also goes back to the earlier point I made that venture capital overwhelmingly goes to men, not less than 10% goes to women. Actually, it's going down a little bit. Entrepreneurs, as you know, David, generally find problems in their lives or opportunities in their lives and want to create a company to solve them.
Yeah. Right.
Women, moms, tend to focus more on feeding kids than dads. That's changing a little bit, but still overwhelmingly moms. It's not surprising to me that 2 moms decided this was a problem they wanted to solve and have basically thrown their lives at it for the past decade and built a very valuable company that has significant impact. It goes back to your point about having a profit motive for sure, but having a broader purpose. Yeah. We need more female entrepreneurs doing that. We need more Black entrepreneurs doing that. We need more purpose-driven impact entrepreneurs really taking on the most significant problems in the world. And we need to have them all over the country, not just on the coast.
And really fast, Steve, because I know you do all that. You have a higher than average proportion of all those kinds of people, dramatically higher. Is it still possible to make as much money that way real fast? Because I got another.
Of course. No, it's long been said that ideas, creativity are evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. So if you can link capital with these ideas, link capital with these entrepreneurs, they absolutely have the opportunity to build massive companies, as Revolution Foods is already on the path to be doing it. And so we really do believe it's sort of a naive kind of rear view mirror view saying, well, if you only are investing in like dorm room startups at Stanford with guys wearing hoodies, that's the only way to make money as a venture capital. That's crazy, because some of the most important industries in our country, healthcare, food and agriculture, et cetera, are really ripe for disruption. It's going to require a different kind of entrepreneur, a different kind of mindset. It's going to require more partnerships, as I talked about, require engaging more on the policy level. And that's really what we're focused on at Revolution. The entrepreneurs who are trying to change the world, leaning into the future, want to be part of this third wave, respectful of policy, respectful of the importance of partnerships, and respectful of the idea that purpose matters and place matters as well.
Great. Kristin, one thing that we didn't really explain, and I want to make sure people get, because it took me a little while to wrap my head around it. You pretty much all entirely serve kids who are lower in the income spectrum, who get reimbursed meals. And many people may not realize the federal government basically pays a set reimbursement rate for a vast number of American school children. And the statistic you gave me that was quite amazing to me as a New Yorker is that 70% of the kids in the New York City schools qualify for a federally reimbursed lunch or whatever. So just quickly talk about how, that's another key element in which you intersect with government.
Yeah, that's right. And I think back to the pandemic and where we are today, you all may know the statistic, 2 of 5 families with children under 12 are reporting some level of food insecurity at this point. So it's not just families who qualified for low-income subsidies before COVID. It's now middle-income families who have, are now struggling paycheck to paycheck or have slipped below that line, who are reliant upon, in our case, great nutrition and kind of getting their feet back under them. So it's a huge number of families across the country. It's a huge lever to set our kids up for success in the classroom and out of the classroom. And the thing I'm really proud of, David, is, we've done it within the allocated taxpayer dollars since the day we started. So when we go into school systems, we are not asking them to go into the red to serve a higher quality program or meals to their kids. We are actually working within the allocated dollars to provide a product that is designed better and that drives a higher outcome from a health and academic standpoint than prior, cheap, low nutrition products that were offered. And I will say one last thing about your comment around schools and the need. Since COVID, schools have they have almost played the biggest role of anyone in feeding communities. So we've had central pickup sites in 175 cities across the nation, New York being a big one, where families have been able to come and collect those meals for their students. So it's a huge hub for nutrition, and I would say a huge hub for innovation, because in the face of adversity comes innovation. And some of our brightest spots in this pandemic have been local leaders across the board gathering together with us and other partners to take care of their community.
Yeah, we had a high school principal, Dr. Quentin Lee of Childersburg High School in Childersburg, Alabama here yesterday, and he was talking about how his school is a food distribution center. My earpiece is falling out, but we've got to wrap, but I just think it's fantastic the way that you have created a system that gets the neediest kids healthier food with no additional cost to the school systems and the ability to build what is probably going to be a very profitable, high growth company. I know you're recently were cash flow positive. This is like the way capitalism is supposed to work. So thank you to you for creating it. Thank you to Steve for investing in it and serving on your board and mentoring you. And thank you to both of you for being here and helping us understand what's really possible with capitalism. I think that's the way we need to think about it.
Yeah, thanks, David. It's great to have this focus on not just getting back to normal, which is too much of the dialogue in the pandemic, but how do we create a better new normal, not just go back to what it was 8 months ago. But 8 months ago, as you're saying, a lot of people were left out of the innovation economy. There are a lot of problems in the society that were not being addressed. So we need to kind of hunker down and deal with the challenge of the day, but imagine new possibilities. And that's what entrepreneurs like Kristin and so many others all around the country are doing. So it's why it's so exciting and fun to be able to back them. But thank you for shining a spotlight on what's happening in entrepreneurship all over America, and particularly a more diverse, inclusive mix of entrepreneurs, which our country desperately needs.
Thanks so much to both of you for doing such great work. Hope to see you both again soon in the real world.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Steve.
Bye-bye.
Thank you both.